The moving truck pulls away as the summer sun beats down on Oak Ridge Estates, a neighborhood of perfect lawns and pristine two-story homes. Marcus Johnson stands in his driveway, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveys his new home. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and shoulders still strong from his college football days, Marcus carries himself with quiet confidence. After 20 years of dedicated service, he's finally achieved what few thought possible, becoming this town's first Black chief of police. Across the street, curtains quickly close. A neighbor retrieving mail glances over, forces a tight smile, then hurries inside. Another slows his car, staring a beat too long before accelerating away. "Did you see that?" Marcus asks, turning to his wife Tanya, as she carries a box of kitchen supplies from their SUV. "I did," Tanya sighs, her medical scrubs exchanged for moving clothes. "But we knew this might happen. Let's give it time." Inside their new home, cardboard boxes create a maze in their living room. Marcus opens one labeled Awards, carefully unwrapping a framed certificate, his recent commendation as chief of police. He places it on the mantel, a quiet statement of belonging. "I earned this position," Marcus says, more to himself than anyone. "And we earned this home. Dad, can I explore the neighborhood?" Their 16-year-old daughter Zoe appears, phone in hand, eager to break free from unpacking. "Be back in an hour," Tanya calls after her, already halfway out the door. As they pack, Tanya arranges family photos showing 3 generations of their family. Marcus in uniform at various stages of his career, Zoe's school portraits, older pictures of grandparents who never would have imagined their grandson living in a neighborhood like this. The doorbell rings just as Marcus breaks down an empty box. It's their first visitor, an envelope containing the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association welcome packet, slipped under the door without a personal greeting. "Well, that's neighborly," Tanya remarks dryly. When Zoe returns, her earlier excitement has vanished. She slumps onto a newly positioned couch, eyes downcast. "What happened?" Marcus asks, sitting beside her. "I walked by the community pool," Zoe says quietly. "Some kids were talking. They didn't see me at first. One said, 'There goes the neighborhood.' Another one said, 'My parents said property values drop when certain people move in.' When they noticed me, they just got quiet and stared." Marcus feels the familiar burn of anger mixed with heartache, not for himself, but for his daughter, who must now navigate these waters. 3 days later, Marcus enters the community center for his first HOA meeting. Conversations halt as he walks in. He chooses a seat near the front, greeting those nearby with a professional nod. Some return it. Others suddenly find the meeting agenda fascinating. Eleanor Watson, the HOA president, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with an ever-present pearl necklace, calls the meeting to order. "Before we begin official business, I see we have some new faces," Eleanor says, her gaze skipping over Marcus. "Our maintenance staff usually doesn't attend these meetings, but you're certainly welcome." "Actually," Marcus says, rising slightly, "I'm Marcus Johnson. My family and I just moved into 427 Oak Ridge Drive." "Oh," Eleanor's eyebrows rise dramatically. "Well, welcome then." Throughout the meeting, Marcus notices the pattern, his raised hand ignored until others have spoken, his suggestions met with quick dismissal. When he mentions his concerns about outdated security protocols in the neighborhood, Richard Klein, a board member with thinning hair and an expensive watch, cuts him off. "We've maintained our security just fine for 20 years, Richard says sharply. "What would you know about it?" "I'm the new chief of police," Marcus says evenly. The room falls silent. "Security happens to be my area of expertise." Eleanor clears her throat. "Well, we appreciate your opinion, but our system works for us. Moving on." Over the next week, official notices appear at the Johnsons' door. A complaint about grass height, though Marcus had just mowed it. A noise violation citation from a night they weren't even home. A warning about improper parking when Tanya's mother visited for dinner. Marcus documents each one, recognizing the pattern forming. This isn't random. This is targeted. 2 weeks after moving in, Marcus pulls into his driveway after a long day at the station. He's still in uniform, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. As he retrieves his briefcase from the passenger seat, a white unmarked car with a cheap magnetic light on top pulls up. 2 men step out wearing what look like police uniforms, but Marcus immediately spots the inconsistencies. Wrong badges, improper holsters, uniforms that don't quite match department standards. They approach with unearned authority, hands resting near their belt holsters in a poor imitation of actual police procedure. "Mr. Johnson," the taller one calls out, "we've received multiple complaints from the Homeowners Association. We need you to come downtown with us to answer some questions." Marcus stands very still, studying them. Behind this charade, he recognizes the old familiar tactic, intimidation dressed as authority, designed to put him in his place. In this moment, everything becomes crystal clear. Marcus's hand moves calmly to his pocket. The fake officers shift nervously as he pulls out his wallet and flips it open, revealing his official police chief's badge and ID. "That's interesting," Marcus says, his voice steady but firm. "Because as the actual chief of police, I'm certain no such complaints have been processed through my department." The taller imposter's face drains of color. The shorter one takes an instinctive step back. "There must be some mistake," the taller one stammers. "Oh, there's definitely a mistake," Marcus agrees. "Impersonating police officers is a felony in this state. I suggest you identify yourselves and explain who sent you before this becomes a much bigger problem." The men fumble through excuses about a security company and miscommunication before retreating to their car, leaving Marcus standing in his driveway, jaw clenched as he memorizes their license plate. Inside, Tanya's eyes widen as Marcus recounts what happened. "This is beyond harassment," she says. "This is intimidation." "I'll handle it," Marcus promises, already dialing the station. The next day, Marcus sits across from the 2 men in an interrogation room. Now in street clothes, they look smaller, ordinary. After 30 minutes of questioning, they crack, admitting they were hired through a private security firm contacted by Eleanor Watson and Richard Klein from the HOA board. "They said they wanted to send a message," the taller one explains nervously. "Make you understand you weren't welcome." Marcus drives home slowly that evening, memories washing over him. He sees himself as a 10-year-old boy growing up in Riverdale, the historically black part of town. His father worked double shifts at the factory while his mother cleaned houses in neighborhoods like Oak Ridge Estates. He remembers deciding to become a police officer after watching how differently law enforcement treated his neighborhood compared to others. At a red light, Marcus recalls the skepticism when he joined the force 20 years ago. The locker room comments, his patrol cars, tires slashed, the passed-over promotions, the endless need to be twice as good, twice as patient, twice as perfect. He specifically chose Oak Ridge Estates because of its excellent school district and because in his years as an officer, he'd never seen a black family living there. "Integration doesn't happen by accident," he'd told Tanya. "Sometimes you have to be the first." Now he wonders if he's put his family in harm's way for his principles. When Marcus arrives home, a new notice is taped to their door, a $500 fine for unapproved exterior decoration, because Zoe hung wind chimes on the porch. That night, headlights sweep across their bedroom walls every 30 minutes. Marcus peeks through the blinds to see the neighborhood watch patrol car passing by. Again, this isn't random monitoring. This is surveillance. At breakfast, Tanya scrolls through the neighborhood social media group she's secretly joined. "They're questioning how we afforded this house," she says, showing Marcus the phone. "Someone actually suggested I check if there are any missing funds at the hospital." Marcus reaches for her hand. "How is work going?" Tanya's face tightens. "My department head keeps accidentally leaving me off email chains. Patients sometimes ask for another doctor when they see me. Yesterday I heard 2 nurses wondering if I was an affirmative action hire." She puts down her coffee cup too hard, liquid splashing over the rim. "It's not just here, Marcus, it's everywhere. Zoe enters, headphones on, barely acknowledging them before grabbing a granola bar and heading for the door. "Zoe," Marcus calls after her. "You've been so quiet lately. What's going on at school?" "Nothing," she mumbles, but her eyes give her away. "I'm just tired." After she leaves, Marcus and Tanya sit in silence. "Maybe we made a mistake," Tanya says finally. "Maybe we should have stayed in our old neighborhood. At least there she had friends." "And what message would that send?" Marcus counters, his voice rising. "That we don't belong here, that we should stay where they think we belong. Don't make our daughter a symbol in your crusade." Tanya snaps, then immediately softens. "I'm sorry, I'm just scared for her." That weekend, Marcus visits the town records office. Poring over historical documents, he discovers that Oak Ridge Estates was developed in the early 1980s when redlining was technically illegal, but still practiced through lending discrimination and zoning policies. The development company's original marketing materials described the community as exclusive and traditional, code words from that era for whites only. In its 40-year history, not a single black family had ever owned property there. A few Asian families had moved in during the last decade, but they remained a small minority. As Marcus leaves the records office, his phone buzzes with a text from Officer Rodriguez at the station. "Thought you should know. Rumors circulating that you're using department resources for personal vendetta against HOA." Marcus grips the steering wheel tightly during the drive home. His police training has taught him de-escalation, the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. But this isn't just about him as an officer now. It's about his family, his home, his right to exist in spaces that have historically excluded people who look like him. As days pass, Marcus notices subtle shifts in neighborhood dynamics. Most neighbors avoid eye contact, hurrying past their house. Others openly stare. But there are exceptions. Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese-American woman who has lived on their street for 15 years, brings over homemade dumplings one evening. "When we moved in, someone threw a rock through our window," she tells them quietly. "It gets better. Not perfect, but better." The Millers, a young interracial couple with a daughter Zoe's age, invite them to a backyard barbecue. Alex Miller, a high school history teacher, pulls Marcus aside. "A lot of us are disgusted by what's happening," he says, "but people are afraid to speak up against Eleanor and Richard. They control everything from landscaping approvals to pool access." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asks. "Because my wife faced similar treatment when we moved in 3 years ago, and because it's wrong." That night, a notification appears on Marcus's neighborhood app. The HOA has called an emergency meeting to discuss urgent security concerns and community standards. The meeting is scheduled for Friday evening. When Marcus shows the notification to Tanya, her face hardens. "This isn't about security," she says. "This is about us." "I know," Marcus replies, "and it's time we addressed it head-on." The next morning, Marcus finds Zoe sitting alone at the kitchen island before school, scrolling through her phone with red-rimmed eyes. "What's wrong?" he asks, sitting beside her. She turns her phone toward him, a social media post from a classmate showing their house with the caption, "Property values dropping by the minute." There goes the neighborhood. "Do you regret moving here?" she asks, her voice small. Marcus takes a deep breath. "When I was your age, my mom cleaned houses in this neighborhood. She'd bring me sometimes during summer break. I'd wait in the car because the homeowners didn't want me inside. I promised myself that someday I'd live in a place like this, not because the houses are nicer or the lawns are greener, but because I have the right to live wherever I can afford to live." He puts his arm around her shoulders. "I don't regret it. But I'm sorry it's been hard. On you. Some of the kids at school are actually nice," Zoe admits, "but they don't speak up when others aren't. That's how discrimination persists," Marcus says, "not just through the people who actively hate, but through those who stay silent." Friday evening arrives with storm clouds gathering over Oak Ridge Estates. The community center parking lot is unusually full as Marcus and Tanya arrive hand in hand. Inside, the room buzzes with tense energy. Eleanor Watson stands at the podium, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Richard Klein sits nearby, avoiding Marcus's gaze. This emergency meeting, Eleanor announces once everyone is seated, has been called to address serious security concerns that have arisen in our community. Though she never looks directly at Marcus and Tanya, her meaning couldn't be clearer. The battle lines are drawn. The community center hums with tension as Eleanor Watson taps the microphone. Behind her, a PowerPoint slide displays a graph showing property values over time, with a recent downward trend highlighted in alarming red. As you can see, Eleanor says, her voice carrying an undercurrent of urgency, we're facing a concerning trend in our neighborhood valuation. The last quarter shows a 3% decline. Richard Klein steps forward, clicking to the next slide. Crime statistics from surrounding areas. And these security concerns can't be ignored, he adds. Neighboring communities have seen increased break-ins. Our safety protocols must be strengthened. Neither of them looks at Marcus and Tanya, seated in the third row. Neither explicitly mentions race, but the implication hangs in the air, unmistakable as the storm clouds gathering outside. We need to consider stricter enforcement of our community standards, Eleanor continues. Some recent additions to our neighborhood have brought different values. Marcus raises his hand. Eleanor pretends not to see until several other hands have been acknowledged. Finally, with obvious reluctance, she nods toward him. Yes, Mr. Johnson? Marcus stands, calm and professional. I'd like to address both the property value concerns and the security issues, as both fall within my professional expertise. We've already covered those topics thoroughly, Richard interrupts. Actually, Marcus persists, as both a homeowner and the chief of police, I believe I can offer valuable insight. There's no need to be aggressive, Eleanor cuts in, her voice sharp. Several neighbors shift uncomfortably in their seats. I'm simply trying to contribute to the discussion, Marcus says evenly. Your tone is confrontational, Richard adds. This is exactly the kind of behavior we're concerned about. A murmur ripples through the room. Marcus feels Tanya's hand on his arm, a silent reminder of their strategy. He takes a deliberate breath. With all due respect, he says, his voice measured, I'd like 5 minutes to present some relevant information to my neighbors. Before Eleanor can object, Alex Miller calls out from across the room, I'd like to hear what Chief Johnson has to say. Others murmur agreement. Eleanor's lips thin to a tight line as she reluctantly yields the floor. Marcus walks to the front, the room carrying a folder. He doesn't rush, doesn't raise his voice, doesn't match the anger directed at him. Instead, he methodically places several documents on the overhead projector. First, regarding property values, he begins, displaying a real estate report. According to 3 independent assessments, property values in Oak Ridge have actually increased by 2% this quarter. The data being presented earlier was selectively chosen from a temporary dip that affected the entire county during construction on the main highway. He changes documents, showing a series of violation notices, all addressed to his family. In the 3 weeks since we moved in, my family has received 17 violation notices. For comparison, I requested records of all violations issued in the past year. He displays another document. The average is less than 2 per household. Annually, 17 in 3 weeks suggests something other than routine enforcement. Richard stands. This is ridiculous. You can't. I'm not finished, Marcus says, his calm unbroken. Regarding security concerns, I have the crime statistics for our precinct showing a 12% decrease in property crime this year. He places another document on the projector, police reports. What you may find most concerning are these reports from 2 individuals arrested for impersonating police officers. They've provided signed statements that they were hired specifically to intimidate my family. His eyes find Eleanor and Richard. Their testimony names those who hired them. A shocked silence falls over the room. Finally, Marcus continues, displaying historical documents. These are the original deed restrictions from when Oak Ridge Estates was developed. While no longer legally enforceable, They explicitly prohibited selling homes to non-white buyers. These restrictions, along with lending discrimination, explain why in 40 years, no black family has owned property here until now. Eleanor's face has gone pale. Richard stares at the floor. I'm not sharing this to assign blame, Marcus says, but we can't address the present without understanding the past. As he returns to his seat, an unexpected voice breaks the silence. Mrs. Chen rises slowly, her small frame straight despite her 80 years. When my husband and I moved here 15 years ago, she says, her accented voice clear but soft, someone threw a rock through our window. Our mailbox was vandalized. People crossed the street to avoid walking past our house. She looks directly at Eleanor. You told us then that we should try to fit in better, that we should understand the community standards, that maybe we would be happier somewhere else. Mrs. Chen turns to face the room. We stayed because this was our home. We had the right to be here, just like the Johnson family has the right to be here now. Alex Miller stands next, his wife beside him. When we moved in, people questioned our relationship, made comments about our daughter. It was subtle, but constant. We almost left. As if a dam has broken, others begin to speak. A younger woman admits she witnessed the fake officer's incident but said nothing. An older man confesses he's been uncomfortable with the whispers about the Johnsons but didn't want to make waves. Eleanor, visibly shaken, raps her gavel repeatedly. This is out of order. We need to vote on community standard enforcement. What you mean? Tanya speaks up for the first time, her voice strong. Is you want to vote on whether you can force us out of our home. That's not. We're just trying to maintain standards. Eleanor stammers. By selectively enforcing rules against one family? Marcus asks. Eleanor's composure cracks. You don't understand. This neighborhood has traditions, values, people work hard to live here. We're not racists. We're protecting what we've built. By sending fake police to intimidate a black family, Alex Miller challenges. That was Richard's idea. Eleanor blurts out, then immediately looks horrified at her admission. Richard jumps to his feet. You approved it! You said we needed to send a message! As they turn on each other, Marcus steps forward again. Before this goes any further, he says, I should mention that I've filed a formal complaint with the County Housing Authority. They're investigating discriminatory housing practices in this community. He gestures toward the back of the room, where two individuals in suits have been quietly observing. These are county officials who will be conducting interviews with board members immediately following this meeting. Eleanor's face registers genuine shock. But we never said anything about race. We never used those words. You didn't have to, Marcus responds, not unkindly. Discrimination doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind words like community standards and property values. Richard collapses back into his chair, the reality of their situation sinking in. We were just trying to protect our neighborhood, he mutters, more to himself than anyone else. From what? Marcus asks quietly. From who? The question hangs in the air as thunder rolls outside. The room has become a mirror, forcing everyone to see reflections they've long avoided. Their silence, their complicity, their willingness to look the other way. It's not a moment of simple victory or defeat. It's a community at a crossroads, confronting truths long buried beneath manicured lawns and homeowners' regulations. Some faces show shame, others defiance. Many simply look lost, their understanding of themselves and their community fundamentally shaken. In this charged silence, the rain finally begins to fall. 3 months after the emergency meeting, residents gather once more in the community center. The room feels different. More chairs have been added, the seating arrangement less rigid. On the walls, alongside the traditional neighborhood maps and regulations, hang new photos showing community events with diverse faces. A hand-lettered banner reads, Oak Ridge Estates Community Election Day. The county investigation has concluded, resulting in a complete dissolution of the previous HOA board. The Housing Authority found clear evidence of discriminatory practices, including the targeted enforcement of rules against the Johnson family and the fraudulent use of authority to intimidate them. Marcus stands at the back of the room, watching as neighbors cast their ballots for a new board. The candidates reflect a more diverse cross-section of the community. Alex Miller is running, as is Mrs. Chen's grandson and several other residents who spoke up at that pivotal meeting. Eleanor Watson sits alone near the window. The investigation resulted in a fine rather than criminal charges, conditional upon her completion of community service hours and discrimination awareness training. Her perfectly coiffed hair and pearl necklace remain, but something in her bearing has changed. The certainty gone from her eyes, replaced by something more complicated. When she notices Marcus looking her way, she doesn't immediately turn away as she once might have. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she gives a small, tight nod of acknowledgement. Not exactly a heartfelt apology, Tanya murmurs beside Marcus, but it's something. She's volunteering at the community center in the Riverdale neighborhood. Now, Marcus says, teaching literacy skills to adults. The director says she's actually pretty good at it. People can surprise you, Tanya replies. Speaking of which, she nods toward a for sale sign being hammered into the lawn across from their house. Richard Klein stands in his driveway, supervising movers loading a truck. He hasn't spoken to anyone in weeks, declining to participate in the county's mediation process. Rather than adapt to the changing community, he's chosen to leave it. Outside the community center, younger residents have organized a block party to coincide with the election. Music plays as children dart between snack tables and games. Zoe sits on a picnic blanket with Jasmine Miller and two other classmates, their laughter carrying across the lawn. That's the first time I've heard her really laugh since we moved in, Marcus observes, his face softening. She's resilient, Tanya says, more than we give her credit for. As the afternoon progresses, the election results are announced. The new board includes Alex Miller as president, Mrs. Chen's grandson as treasurer, and representatives from various parts of the neighborhood. Not a complete transformation, but a meaningful shift in power. In the weeks that follow, changes come gradually to Oak Ridge Estates. The new board revises the outdated and selectively enforced regulations. Community events become more inclusive. Some neighbors who once avoided the Johnsons now wave from their driveways or stop for brief conversations. Others maintain their distance, polite but reserved. The occasional sideways glance or whispered comment still occurs. Change comes in increments, not overnight revolutions. Marcus takes on a leadership role beyond his position as chief of police, joining a county-wide initiative to address housing discrimination. His experiences become a case study in how seemingly neutral policies can be weaponized to exclude. One evening, the Johnson family sits around their dinner table, now thoroughly settled into their home. Photos hang on walls, plants thrive in corners, and the smell of Tanya's mother's recipe for jerk chicken fills the air. I got an A on my history presentation, Zoe announces, the one about housing segregation and redlining. That's amazing, Marcus says, genuine pride in his voice. I used our neighborhood as an example, she continues. Jasmine helped me research. Some kids actually came up afterward and said they never knew about that stuff. You're teaching them, Tanya smiles. I'm still mad we had to go through all this, though, Zoe admits, her expression turning serious. It's not fair that we had to fight just to live here. You're right, Marcus agrees. It's not fair, and acknowledging that is important. But I'm also proud of how we handled it, Tanya adds. We didn't run away. We didn't let them push us out. And the neighborhood is better for it. It's better, Zoe says thoughtfully. But it's not fixed. No, Marcus agrees. These things take time, more time than they should. The conversation is interrupted by the sound of a moving truck backing into a driveway 3 houses down. Through the window, they see a family unloading boxes, a South Asian couple with 2 elementary-age children looking around their new surroundings with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Marcus and Tanya exchange a look of understanding. I made too much chicken, Tanya says, already reaching for a container. Maybe we should welcome our new neighbors. As dusk falls, the Johnson family crosses the street, food in hand. The simple act carries the weight of history, of battles fought and barriers broken, of spaces claimed and communities challenged. Later that night, Marcus stands in his driveway alone, looking up at stars appearing one by one above Oak Ridge Estates. His police badge catches the last light of day. He thinks about the morning briefing he'll lead tomorrow, about policies that need changing within his own department. He thinks about the text he received from the new HOA president asking for his input on community safety measures. He thinks about the neighbors who still avert their eyes and those who now meet his gaze. The work of change happens in both directions, within systems and against them, through formal authority and everyday resistance. Progress isn't a straight line but a constant negotiation, a daily choice to stand firm in spaces where you belong, but haven't always been welcome. A child's laughter rings out from the new family's home down the street. Marcus smiles to himself. In that sound, there is hope. Not the easy hope of problems solved forever, but the hard-earned hope of people willing to build something better together. One difficult conversation, one policy change, one welcoming gesture at a time. He turns and walks back into his house, into the home his family has made theirs, not just by buying it, but by fighting for their place in it. The door closes behind him, a quiet but definitive statement. We are here. We belong. And we are not going anywhere.